we become experts at driving backwards at high speed, looking in the rearview mirror where we were, not where we should be going. You get enamored with that. It's like, well, how did we do this week? How do we do compared to the week ago? How do we do this month compared to a month? And everybody's doing this comparison to optimize to the past. The universe throws you left hooks and right crosses, and it changes direction on you. So while you're staring at the rearview mirror, somebody out there in your market is looking out at the horizon and picking the new place to play and the new way to play, and they're going to eat your lunch, and you're not going to know what the hell hit you.
Welcome to the Performance Initiative Podcast.
Our goal is to provide you and ourselves with the tools to be the best versions of ourselves.
We are your hosts, Dr. Grant Cooper
and Dr. Zinovi Mailer. Well, we just wrapped up a conversation with Marty Strong.
Marty has one of the most impressive resumes that I think that you could imagine. Decorated Navy SEAL, goes on into the business world, becomes a CEO, takes over the company and leads it to become $1 billion company. Just amazing, and a really nice and down-to-earth guy.
Absolutely. And then he writes a number of books, novels and business books, and then goes on and explores a lot of different things that you wouldn't necessarily think would come out of this conversation. AI, optimization of business, thinking about your star players in your business, and a lot of counterintuitive thoughts.
How to create a positive culture. I personally really enjoyed the conversation about the geopolitical, like where we are currently geopolitically, technologically, and what the future holds. I think
too many to recount, so please enjoy.
Enjoy.
Marty, welcome, and thank you for joining us for this conversation.
How you doing, guys?
Pretty good. Well, people say that success leaves clues, and you certainly have been leaving more than just simple clues. You, besides being a CEO, a speaker, and a consultant, you've written 9 novels, 2 business books, another book coming out very soon. And there are a number of topics that we'd love to touch on, and hopefully we will. But we wanted to start with a question that we feel you're one of the best qualified to answer. And that question, it pertains to, in movies, it really pertains to the fact that you were a high-level operator in the elite Navy SEAL teams, and you made a successful transition to become a high-level operator in business. And in movies depicting business and business books, a lot of times we see quotes from Sun Tzu's Art of War, or quotes of military leaders that have taken people into battle. And between the two paradigms, the war and the business, can we borrow freely from one to another? And essentially, in other words, when we're in business, are we at war?
Yes. The applicable metaphor. I love Sun Tzu, by the way. I think that there's more than at least 40% of military experience, especially the applied leadership, the applied crisis management, preparation for crisis, preparation for the unknown, that is part and parcel of being in the military, mostly when you start to get into a leadership function. And if you're not in a leadership function, you're used to being led that way. You're used to contingency thinking. You're used to storyboarding and thinking through all these different possible outcomes and scoring them for different risk factors and loading them with different resource requirements. Those are all things that on the face of it sound like something that would apply to business, but when you get into business, at least in my experience, most people that are in business and have been trained, especially in bigger companies or coming out of B schools, haven't really been taught to do that. They've been taught to kind of manage and focus on the past. They look at the past performance, the past history of execution, past mistakes, past successes. And like in my second book, the subtitle is Strategic Leadership in the Age of Optimization. So where optimization becomes the focal point, and it actually becomes a replacement for strategic thinking. And strategic thinking is what I just mentioned the military does. It's not always about thinking 2, 3, 4, 5 years in advance. Strategic thinking can also be about 5 or 6 variable futures in the intermediate period. So that is definitely a skill set and a body of knowledge that can be and should be transferred over to the business world. On the business side, most people in the military are not very good at managing and measuring resources. And there's a pretty simple reason for that. you don't have to recruit the replacement for the person that broke his leg. It's like a Pez dispenser. They just pop up, fully qualified. Fully qualified. They can do everything that Bob could do before Bob broke his leg. Now you got Sam, and Sam, you know, you don't have to hunt. You don't have to go to, you don't have to go out into careerbuilder.com, or you don't have to do anything. It just happens,
Yeah.
The same thing with equipment. Same thing with most consumables like fuel and ammunition and water. It just kind of happens. The other aspect that doesn't really convey, and it would be valuable, I think, in the military context to understand from business, is the whole concept of money and paying people. That's another magical thing that happens. You go off someplace, somewhere back there, there's a direct deposit hitting, every couple of weeks, and you do your job, and you never concerned that that job's going to go away or that paycheck's going to be impacted, and you just get used to all those resources just being there, everything from your paycheck all the way through, replacements. So you step out in the real world, that ain't the way it's in the real world. I mean, you instantly realize finding talent and grooming and training talent to a certain standard is a huge part of any leader's responsibility. And failure in that particular category is pretty much failure in all business categories eventually.
Yeah. That was something that really, that when you wrote about, well, I guess pretty much what you were just saying, that you can't count on the same level of dedication and everything. You have to instill that as a culture into your company. It doesn't come prepackaged the way that it might in the military, where everyone's pulling in the same direction, and the people that are there are there. They're all in. Whereas you have to kind of instill that in a company.
Very hard in a company to get everybody to treat the workday like it's life and death.
Yeah.
That, I mean,
Yeah.
and even if you like each other, the best you can get in business is empathy and respect and a form of love for everybody that you're working with. And if you see somebody's overwhelmed and you're done for the day and you're about to walk out, you go over there and you hang out for 3 more hours and help them out. I mean, that's a pretty
Yes.
high level of culture if you do it just because you believe that you should. And if enough people think that way, then everybody knows somebody's going to come in and help them out when they're in a pinch. In the military, you're going to go to war with the people to the left and right of you. And so everybody has an interest in training the new guys, training themselves, testing each other, because as they used to say when I first joined the Navy, you never know when the phone's going to ring. And then when it does, you go with
Yeah.
what you got. You don't get no more training.
Yeah.
So it's a different level of focus, I would say, for sure. And rightly so. I
Yeah.
mean,
Right. Something that I thought was really interesting was this idea of friction between optimization and strategic thinking and visionary thinking. Like, could you touch on that? You touched on it before, but could you expand on that a bit?
so, and my research shows this probably happened about 20 years or so when publicly traded companies changed how they were incenting senior officers. And what they did is they started giving them more and more stock options. And so stock options, obviously a derivative of the value of the stock, are not necessarily a good bellwether for the long-term objectives of a corporation. They're very good bellwethers for the short-term performance of the corporation. So if you want your stock to go up in value, you can just not pay dividends, or you can buy back some of the stock. You've instantly made all your stock options worth a heck of a lot more. And over time, this became a practice, and then it went into the private sector, large companies and middle market companies, and eventually it trickles down to the business schools. The next thing you know, everybody's being taught, in the MBA programs that this is the way of the world, and short-term gratification is okay. It's expected to be your focus, and therefore it is your focus. Now, the opposite of that is if you're doing that, you're not going to make an investment in the future. You're not going to build plant and equipment and hire more people and train more people for the day 2 years from now when your vision tells you that we have to be ready to fight a different fight or win a different fight or be in a different position in the market. because that's an investment. An investment is not, you don't get paid back short-term gratification. Investment is a long-term gratification process. And so what's happened then over the last 20, 25 years is that horizon of investment just kept shrinking, almost to where it aligned with the stock options horizon.
Hmm.
And this, I'm not just saying this, there's lots and lots of articles people can look at. And the sad part is it kind of trickles down and becomes kind of the norm for companies and business schools. They think, okay, that's the way you do it. And then the other component I think I touched on the book is you empower that mindset when you have things that can minutely measure the past for you and pop it up in a dashboard. It's kind of like we become experts at driving backwards at high speed, looking in the rearview mirror where we were, not where we should be going. And you get enamored with that. It's like, well, how did we do this week? How do we do compared to the week ago? How do we do this month compared to a month? And everybody's doing this comparison to optimize to the past.
Yeah.
And that's not the way the universe works. The universe throws you left hooks and right crosses, and it changes direction on you. So while you're staring at the rearview mirror, somebody out there in your market is looking out at the horizon and picking the new place to play and the new way to play, and they're going to eat your lunch, and you're not going to know what the hell hit you.
I guess on a micro, like on another, it seems like that's the opening for smaller and medium-sized companies is that they have, especially if they're not a public company, then they can move a lot faster. They're not as responsive to the fluctuations of the stock price.
They
right?
should be.
They can be a lot more nimble as
they
right?
should. Yeah, they should be able to. But there's a lot of influence. You sometimes you're really good at starting a company, and then you get to a point where you're big enough where you think you have to ask the experts. And then you start hiring people in at middle management, maybe at the COO level, and they've got MBAs, and they just came from a multi-billion-dollar company, and they'll tell you the way it should be done now. And so there's a calcification at that point where they start to build the infrastructure and the bureaucracies that they're comfortable with. They impose the communication methods that they're comfortable with, which is their past, right?
Right.
And now what you've done is you've brought somebody in, to turn your house into your parents' house. It's just, and at this point, usually founders, especially innovative thinking founders, rebel and either get rid of them, or they just take what they can take from the action and walk away, and somebody else buys the business. So, I mean, and that's because being an entrepreneur isn't necessarily great training for managing that moment where you think you need to have these experts from out of town come in and do things for you.
That's such an interesting friction, right? Between wanting to respect, the knowledge gained from the past and, not completely throw out the baby with the bathwater, but also have a vision for the future and not be beholden to past norms and things like that. How does one balance that? How does one,
I don't know if there is a balance.
Yeah.
I just finished Walter Isaacson's book about Elon Musk, like the fourth biography I've read of Elon Musk. And there's some pretty good insights in there. To give you kind of an example, when he was trying to build SpaceX and they were trying to build rockets, he said, well, okay, who do we go to knows how to build rockets? Well, rocket engineers. So who has all the rocket engineers? Well, NASA and any agencies, any corporations that were kind of building things for NASA or for the Defense Department. So he basically had to go to that well. He had to bring in people that did it the way it's been done. So now he's not an engineer as far as rockets, although now he probably self-taught. He has engineering education. He understands mechanically how things work. So he would start walking around and say, just why? Why do we got to do that? Why do we have to do that? Why does that skirt have to be there? Why does this sound depressing pad have to be here? And what he was getting back was because.
Right.
And then that's not an answer. Well, it's the way it's always been done. It's the way NASA does it. Well, why do they do it that way? But just they do it that way. So he came up with a method where if anybody couldn't answer where the rule came from, he said, I will fly the person. If you can find the person that made the rule, I'll pay for them to fly here and tell me why. And what he discovered was everybody was just doing what they'd been taught and told over the course of, a whole professional career. It could have been 10 years, 20 years, 15 years. It's one of the reasons why NASA ended up getting so, I guess, so stodgy, because the older NASA got, the older the people in NASA got at the top. In the beginning,
Right.
when we were trying to put a man on the moon, the average age of the NASA engineers was about 29 years old. And they didn't know what they were doing. So that's why they blew things up constantly, because they were experimenting. So Elon Musk decided to do the same thing. So he doesn't care if he blows something up. He takes all the data from that and learns, and then the next time they don't blow it up the same way. Maybe they blow it up a different way. But
Right.
eventually he gets to a better performing outcome. And he does it by questioning all the rules.
Yeah.
So if you think that mindset, if you were an entrepreneur and you had the perspective to do this, you would bring in MBAs and everything, and you listen to everything they had to say. You'd absorb all their information, because that would be dumb not to listen, right? And then you'd ask why. Why
Right.
can't all my people talk to me if I want them to talk to me? Why does there have to be layers? Why does there have to be filters? Why does, and you start asking why, and things start to unravel pretty fast, because the people that are the advocates for the system and the structure that they've been invested in and qualified
Yes.
by,
Yeah.
usually don't. They're like those engineers talking to Elon Musk. They don't know the
Right.
answer. They don't know the why. So
It's so interesting. Yeah. In medicine, we're both doctors, and in medicine, there's a lot of similarities there, where there's some things, there's a good why, but there are some things that everyone does, and you ask why, and you get, oh, that's why I did in fellowship. Okay, why? Well, everyone does it that way. It's like, okay, and you realize where the dogma is.
and you guys, I'm sure, people that do surgery all the time. So the technology changes. So
Sure.
the way it's been done procedurally might make perfect sense, but something's changed the validity of steps in the procedures, because there's some other technology that's come into play.
Right.
And you don't need to rip a person apart and invasively and put scaffolding against their spine. There's all these other options. So it would be dumb in any profession, I think, especially if there's, dire consequences like, medicine, or leading SEALs, that, that you don't step back. And again, this is kind of what the third book's about. Step back and appreciate the new information, and this kind of, I call it intellectual humility. Set aside for a second all this information that you think you have and all this knowledge that you think you have. Try to clear your mind so you can absorb new sources of information, and don't fight it. Don't argue with it. It's not an exercise in, jujitsu. It's the exact opposite. Is just be a complete sponge, and even go beyond that, to be so curious that you reach out to all kinds of sources you never would. So like in medicine, it'd be maybe holistic medicine. Maybe hey, I wouldn't do that for a million years. Okay, but you don't know what you don't know. So go learn it, and then don't do it because you've made a choice,
Right. Right.
not because you're
That's
ignorant of the possibilities.
Friends, we hope you're finding value in the content. If you're enjoying what you're watching, please consider hitting the like button, help us with our YouTube algorithm, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on the notification button to stay up to date with everything going on in the channel.
Right. It's very interesting that this one, I really love this one topic or concept that you introduced, which is crowdsourcing to get ideas, but then not crowdsourcing for the decision, because then you're creating shared responsibility and you're abdicating your own role as a decision maker and as a leader. And where does that break down? How do you avoid that?
Well, the leader has to be either personally, if they're an owner, accountable to themselves, and you're accountable to a lot of other things, right? There's laws and regulations, and you can be accountable to your employees and all that, but you first have to be accountable to yourself. You have to be true to the role you've chosen to take on, and that means you are calling the shots. If you have a board like I do, you have to be true to the representation of what the board says your job is. You have to be accountable to them. You can't just go off on your own tangent, because there's some constraints there. So I think the point I was trying to make in the book on bringing up that example, which is again one of these things that leaks into schools and business schools and everything, it sounds great. And if you're a leader and you don't want to be responsible and accountable, what a wonderful gift if the MBAs and the business schools are pumping out all these people that believe we'll all make the decision and then nobody's accountable, you know? And you're like, really? Well, I'll buy into that. Here's the here's the hot potato, kids. Go at it. Tell me what I should do. And now I can go to my board and say, this is the normal best practice in management, is to let everybody decide. And this is how it came out. Here you go. It's abdication, but I mean, it's
Is
like
that the culture
the
now?
excuse me.
Has that become the has that become the culture?
I'll tell you, I had several guys that worked for me that were one was a 6'2" SEAL sniper, had 8 or 9 combat missions, and he went and got an MBA with William and Mary. And I had another guy who was an Army Ranger, multiple combat tours, and he went and got a degree at George Mason. And they were getting all this in their schools. They're getting all this, and they were coming back and telling me, this is what they're telling me. This is what they're teaching, And I go, really? And I thought, okay, so how does that work? How does that functionally work? So think of it like crowdsourcing a design of a logo. If you crowdsourced a logo and it was designed and you had 3 designs, and then you crowdsourced a voting population to decide which one they wanted, they may be right because it's a marketing branding kind of a thing. And as long as the people that are making the decisions on yes or no have some relationship to your product and to your market, that might be a great way to do that. But what's the downside? There's really no downside, and you can correct it fairly easy. But if you are making a decision about spending, $50 million on acquiring a company, and you've got 6 choices of companies to buy, and they all have different pros and cons. Can you imagine just bringing a bunch of people into an auditorium and showing a slideshow of the different companies and then walking out and say, you guys pick, let me know how it turns out. I mean, yeah, because eventually somebody, an investor, a stockholder, somebody's going to want to know who the heck made that call. So there will always be, when there's money or when there's life at risk, there's the consequences go up, the accountability becomes more true. And, you should always pay attention to accountability and check yourself, make sure that you're not abdicating that. Yeah. And from the flip side, in basic leadership, if your direct reports are coming to you and laying the problem at your feet and then shutting up and looking at you, they're looking for the insurance policy. They're looking for you to tell them what to do. And then they walk away. And if it doesn't work, it's on the boss. And so that's kind of a from the bottom up, abdicating your responsibility. What you should be doing, if you have the authority to make a decision, is make the decision. And if you want to make a recommendation, recommend what your decision is. You want to throw your logic behind your decision, fine. But don't come in and just kind of vomit all the mess and details and then step back and go, and what do you think? That and I say that, and anybody that's ever been in management in any company will know instantly, yep, that happens all the time. People are always looking for somebody else to take the monkey off their back.
Yeah. And I imagine as a leader, when you crowdsource things or when you get a consensus, decision, there's an element of dispersed responsibility. So if things go south, you can say, even if it's just saying it to yourself, well, this is what everyone wanted. This was what everyone agreed on. So yes, I'm ultimately responsible, but not exactly.
You certainly can.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah. I like I said in the book, crowdsourcing insight is back to what I was saying before about, being intellectually humble and then being intellectually curious and just sucking in information from every source. So I do that constantly. I'm in a constant state of either interacting with, all kinds of different media, all kinds of different subjects, things that have nothing to do with my daily work, archaeology, astronomy, you name it. I'm all over the place. I talk to lots of different industry leaders and so what's going on in your business, what's falling apart, what's working, and they'll say something, all of a sudden it'll trigger something that has an impact on my current situation. And it becomes kind of a lifestyle, it becomes a way of thinking and a way of moving through, your world. And you just have to be comfortable at not being the expert in a room every single solitary day and just take in information. At some point, if there's a kind of a nexus where you have to make a decision, then you're probably much, much better informed and prepared than if you just sat there and did the football play from last week.
Right.
Hmm.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
there's some saying if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room, something like that. Like you always want to
Yeah.
be looking up knowledge from other people as much as you can.
That's the most rewarding experience for me. When I'm sitting talking to people and I'm having aha moments over and over again,
Yes.
I feel like I'm just, like I found, $500 on the sidewalk kind of thing,
Right. Right.
so yeah, it's a different way of thinking, it's a different way of leading, and it's a different way of mentoring and grooming and coaching your say secondary and tertiary leadership management structures to try to get the most out of the environment, to get the most out of the external world as far as input and information, make good decisions. And, the other thing is you have to have the ability to forgive a mistake if it was done honestly and done this way, because you're going to take chances and you're going to fail. Kind of like the Elon Musk thing, things will blow up. And then, instead of blaming everybody, you get everybody in a room and say, first, let's recover, repair, and then learn from it and then move forward. And
Yeah.
if you run a company that way and that's the culture, it doesn't matter how big the company is.
And
People
part of
stop.
that color,
I was going to say people
No,
stop being afraid of trying. They stop.
yeah.
They stop. Yeah.
yeah. Right.
And then part of that, I guess, is one of the topics that one of the things you've mentioned in your book is that 85%, right? That magic number, because I think we're all more comfortable with that 99% certain, having 99% of or 100% of knowledge so that you can make the right decision. But you're almost never going to arrive at that number because there's that elusive information that even if you know all the information, you feel like there's more out there and you never end up making that decision. So even within the company, if you allow for that and encourage the 85% rule, where that's a good time to make that decision and commit to something, then it will allow better action and decision making.
It's a simple way to think about addressing a couple things. One is the paralysis by analysis,
Mhm.
that you have to get it perfect in design so you actually never build anything because every time as time goes on, new information's coming in, so you go back to reset, you go back to reset, you go back to reset. Then somebody says, we don't even want to do it anymore, and it just dies. That's one thing. The other thing is, except for like brain surgery, which you should try for 99%, um, the 85% rule is a way to allow a team of leaders and the technical people that are the experts to know that there's not going to be retribution for getting to a point of probable execution and then rapid prototyping based on my market feedback or environmental feedback. You get the rest of the way when the tires are on the road spinning and you can see how they're performing. You don't try for perfection in most things because you never get there. And there's that whole resource curve where the closer you get to perfection, the more and more and more time and the more and more effort, and pretty soon, you're almost there. But the way the world is and the way the universe is, everything's flying by you, as
Yeah.
Bill Gates said, business at the speed of thought. And you screw around like that, and people are just they're gonna leapfrog in your market. They're going to blow by you in almost every aspect of your life. So that's 85% rules. Give yourself a break. Do your best. Get it to a point where it works, but it's not perfect, and then start tweaking and grooming and improving on it.
I really liked your analogies to the cars in the books. I think there was one in each of the books, but the idea of a project being sort of like you're going on a trip and you're getting in the car and you're going somewhere. And I think the analogy was the car gets a flat tire or gets in an accident. And so you get out and you look around and you make sure everyone's okay, and then you get AAA and they come and they fix the tire. But that's not the time to sit there and think about how did the accident happen? Like you still need to get back on the road and keep moving forward.
Right. And it shouldn't change your objective. If your objective was to go from New Jersey to Wally World in California, then, there's a lot of different things to think about. If you're willing to focus on the end objective and be flexible in in the method of pursuit.
Yeah.
In that example you just cited, if the car breaks down and you have to put the car in the shop, you can get some other conveyance and go to an airport and fly to Wally World. You can rent a car and drive to Wally World. And there's all these other ways you can get to Wally World if the goal is to get to Wally World. If the road you're on is washed out in a storm, you find another road. You go north before you go west. I mean, this is the whole point of distinction between operational planning and operational execution and vision and strategy. Vision and strategy are about the end state, what they call in the military the commander's intent. And the idea that a squad of Marines charging a hill that have been told by the officer in charge that we need to take that hill so the enemy can't take it because there's other groups moving up on our right and left. And if the enemy pulls that hill, the whole battle plan will fall apart. So this is critical. Every single Marine in that squad knows what their job is to take that hill. If 20 steps towards that hill, the officer gets shot and killed, they don't just sit down and go, okay. That's the Marines and the Army, they call it commander's intent, but it's also, that's a short objective, but it's crystal clear and simple to explain and easy to communicate.
Right.
They put it in the context of the other ramifications of failure. And then they say, whatever happens, that's what we got to do. And whether I'm with you or not, you can do the same thing strategically. You can basically tell everybody, this is where we're going. And we may wiggle around, take 2 steps back, go north, go south, whatever, but we're heading west.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like, I've thought of that with our medical practice. Just, we try to make sure everyone, look, we're focused on the patient, everyone's, so everyone's kind of pulling in the same direction, no matter what task they have within the office. Everyone remembers the ultimate goal.
Yeah, but in taking that analogy of the car or an accident or something happening, the difficult part is looking back. Once you've gotten to Wally World and you're there, looking back and figuring out, why did that accident happen? So like in medicine, we have M&Ms, right? And morbidity, mortality rounds. And in, I believe in military, it's after action.
AARs, after action reviews.
Yeah, so after action review, and you kind of go and you try to be as harsh about the fact that what actually went wrong. And it seems that in medicine and the military, it just makes sense, right? Because the lives are on the line. But as we get more into the business aspect of things, it becomes much more touchy, much more difficult to actually find somebody who will, where we find does the responsibility lie, right? And so how do you address that in a business setting?
What's funny is in the military context and in the medical context, whether it's the right thing to do or not, you usually don't have a whole lot of time to do it because you're on to the next thing. You're on to the next mission, next patient. In business, the failures are usually done in a way that there's plenty of time to get everybody in a room and sit down and talk about it. Because it's not, you don't have the rapid fire. I mean, I did 36 combat missions and I did 30 of them back to back, sometimes 2 a day. So I didn't have time to sit back and go, okay, guys, let's talk about what happened on mission number 2. It was kind of like a running appreciation of what had worked and what didn't work, and then trying to build it into my next plan and briefing. And we were all collectively were learning together, and we toss out a couple of things. And if I said, that didn't work last time, boss, remember? Oh yeah, that's right. Which should we do this time? But it was like real time, right? Because you had to keep going.
Right.
In business, if something doesn't work out, I've always found there's plenty of time, but they don't have the desire to do it for what you just said. If your life's on the line or somebody's life's on the line, you have a moral and ethical, compulsion to figure it out, right? But if nothing's on the line except for maybe EBITDA 12 months from now, it's hard to get everybody fired up about going in and falling on their swords and admitting that, they didn't do something right. Back to the culture of the 85% approach. If failure is acceptable, but a lack of learning from failures isn't acceptable, then you can create a culture where going into a room and talking about what just went wrong is okay and acceptable. But you have to develop that culture. You have to develop that style. You have to get and it can't be just the top. I've learned that the hard way. You can't be the the CEO who thinks that way, and then the 3 layers below you don't, because
Mhm.
it's not happening. It doesn't matter how many speeches you give or whatever. It's not happening. They're walking out, right, whatever you say, sir, and then they're doing whatever they want to do, their own style. So you have to make sure that it's permeating throughout the organization. It has to be part of onboarding. The whole cultural aspect has to be a part of everybody's interview. It has to be part of the onboarding process. I mean, I think I cite in a couple of books the Marine Corps' culture. I mean,
Yeah.
you learn about the history of the Marine Corps when you join the Marine Corps, and you hear about it every day in boot camp, and you hear about it all the time throughout your time in the Marine Corps. And then they have a kind of a continuation of pride after you get out. It's a community pride. It's a collective pride. The thing is, you never, you weren't an ex-Marine, you're always a Marine, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that took them 200 plus years to cultivate that strong culture. But they take it so seriously that it's from day one to the last day you're wearing the uniform. And everybody buys in, and everybody, repeats that approach to things. Now, you mentioned earlier about, because some of this convey from the military to business. It's hard to build a business culture past a certain size or scale. If you're all in the same trench, or like in the SEAL training, the same rubber boat, and you can see the people who aren't pulling hard, you can see the people aren't pulling in the right direction, and then you can see when everything's perfectly in sync. But when you've got 40 rubber boats in the dark, you can't tell what everybody's doing anymore. You have no idea. So the bigger you get, the harder it is to contain and retain a culture and a set of objectives that are cultural. There's a few big companies that have been able to do it, but they're far and few between. And the further the I'll say the cultural leader gets from the dock worker, the truck driver at the bottom of the pyramid of the org chart, it starts to get diluted and
Yeah.
more and more and more and more difficult.
Is there a secret sauce, you think, to having that culture permeate, or it's just those things you said, like onboarding, trying to
Yeah.
repetition, and
If
it's a hard
it
one.
it always I was with a company where, and I think it was Netflix, I think, had the same. There's their famous story about Netflix when they created it, but they realized they were losing control of their culture, and it was because they hired HR professionals. And before
Yeah.
they got too big, the primary owners interviewed everybody. It's like,
Mm,
who am I going to let into my family, kind of thing. And
right.
they were screening for a particular kind of person. The proverbial eating pizza under the desk and sleeping there, 7 days in a row to get the job done kind of person.
Yeah.
It's a high level commitment, right? Almost like a military level commitment.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
Elon.
when they got bigger and bigger and bigger, they had to bring in HR people to try to find the bodies. And so they sat down one night and they realized this was happening. And so they spent all night writing on printer paper of a copier machine what they thought their rules were, their norms, their cultural objectives and goals. Well, I was with a company where we did the same thing. At least one of the primary people had to interview everybody. And we were scaring them. We're saying, this is the way it's going to work. You may be an accountant, but you might find yourself driving a truck with a bunch of supplies in the back. This is a
Mm,
project focused team environment. You have your primary job that your resume reflects, and then you're going to get cross trained in a lot of other things. It's going to be very exciting. You're going to be involved in things you haven't been involved in before. But that's how we do things here. And there's no such thing as one point of failure. One person quits, the whole thing, their whole category collapses. Everybody can kind of cross train and do everybody else's job to an extent, which also creates empathy across
yeah.
organizational silos. And some people would say, no, I just want to have my stack of work and live in my cubicle. I don't want to do that. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
We got past 200 million and we hired an HR division. And I went down to the floor where all the financial people were, and I was a senior vice president. And I was walking through and I was approached by a woman. She says, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be on this floor unless you have an appointment. And I said, well, I'm looking for so-and-so. She said, well, you need to get an appointment. And okay, who are you? And then she goes, well, I'm so-and-so. And I go, okay. And this is where we went from like 5 bookkeepers essentially to an army of about 60 accountants in the
Mm,
span of about 3 years.
Yeah.
And, I'm a happy-go-lucky guy, and I said, "Okay, who are you in charge of everything now?" She goes, "No, no, the vice president so-and-so. Can I just meet him?" And she goes, "I don't think so. He's busy." So I said, "Oh, well, I'll meet him. He's over in one of those offices." So I went over and I sat down and I, introduced myself. I just said my name. And, he was very haughty and he looked at me and like, "Do you have an appointment?" And so I realized something bad happened. So I left there, still didn't tell him who I was. Went upstairs. I had the other corner office, and the other one was the president of the company. So I went down to the president, shut the door, and said, "You're not going to believe what's going on here." And
It's very much like
basic,
undercover boss.
we lost control. We
Yeah.
by growing and growing as fast as we did, we brought in outside influences and we delegated. They're professional HR people,
Sure.
but they were hiring by resume. They weren't hiring by cultural fit. And so we never really could get it back. The senior people that had all been together from the beginning, we kind of had that in our, planning and decision-making process, but the rest of the place, it just kept getting so big. It was too hard to
Right.
control.
Probably once it's out of hand, it's hard. It's as you said, it's hard to undo. It's sort of like getting out of shape. It's a lot easier to stay in shape than it is to get back in shape.
Yeah, and I think anybody that's gone through growing a company and believes in a cultural type feel, um, either kind of pines for the day when they were in charge of a small group of dedicated people that
Mm.
all had each other's back, or they sell the company when it gets to the size where it's too big for that to happen anymore, and they go out and they buy another company that's small and they build it up again. And there are
Yeah.
serial entrepreneurs that love that early stage ramp up where there's excitement and there's risk, and
Yeah.
there's also a smaller cadre of people that are all kind of throw it in with each other to try to make it happen. So, you can choose that. You can choose to be in the big architecture, bureaucratic kind of thing, or you can choose to try to get into a smaller world.
There was something you said in the book that really took me by surprise, and I thought about it, and it made total sense, after reflecting on it, which is that when you have an all-star employee, this goes sort of to the cross training. When you have an all-star employee, and I expected it to be more of a veneration of that all-star employee, but it was actually that's a problem, right? It was sort of it's great to have employees that want to pull together and are working hard, and all-star employees are fantastic, but if they're really being an all-star, then it kind of betrays or belies the fact that there's some kind of problem in the systems that are in place. And that really made me stop and think, because we have
Yeah.
all-star employees
We do.
that,
Yes.
that we rely on, and you realize, oh, right,
That's a
that's
problem.
yes, like thank you, and also we have to reflect on that and say, well, we have a little problem there. It's
Yeah, well,
interesting.
I mean, all stars do it to themselves. They tend to be work magnets. They like the work. They like a lot of work. They like being competent at their work. They like executing at a high level. They say yes too much. And I think the point of the book was from the person in charge of somebody like this. Let's say you have 4 people that are doing similar functions, but one of them is doing 85% of the work every week.
Right.
Why not triple that person's pay and get rid of the other 2 or 3?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
look at it for what it is. This person is worth 2 other people, pay them that, or figure out why these other people can't do what they're doing, and all this work is gravitating towards the superstar or the all-star. Because at some point, the all-star gets burned out, and I'm telling you, this is just the way it works. Mostly middle management, sometimes senior management, they never really understand the value of that person, and so they don't value that person. And that person then eventually gets resentful and decides to go someplace else because they're not looking to be patted on the back every day, but nobody's taking care of the fact that other people aren't doing their work.
Yeah.
Nobody's paying attention to that, and nobody's rewarding them for picking up the slack. So they're
Right.
just taken for granted. And the risk in an organizational design, which all the pistons are supposed to be moving the same way, and if you have one piston that's working 50 times harder than the other pistons, you're gonna have a problem. The engine is gonna fall apart or blow apart or whatever. So you wanna make sure that you, identify those people, get them involved in process design and any other way you can leverage their brain, and then evaluate the other people that whose work has been migrating and find out
Right.
why and replace
Right.
them. Better to have 4 all-stars than 1 all-stars pissed off at the world and 3 other people that are working, till about 3 in the afternoon and driving home.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That was that was the big take home to me was, yes, if that all-star disappears, gets sick, anything, right?
Yeah.
Then why, there needs to be a system in place to that doesn't just rely on one person to be there,
Right.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is the single point of failure rule, or
yeah.
concentration risk. It even if you recognize it and you compensate them, that one person, they have a car wreck, they get sick, they
Right.
decide their spouse gets a job across country and decide to move, and all of a sudden you're stuck with the other 3 people. Yeah. And that's when you find out what you got left. Yeah, so you have to be very careful about that. And
Yeah.
I love them to death, and I've seen organizations negatively impacted more often than I've seen them positively impacted by having people like that.
Hmm. That's amazing.
Build
Definitely
the
counterintuitive.
Yeah,
Counterintuitive
Yeah.
for sure.
yeah, build the team and reward that all-star.
Yeah.
Sure.
Can I pivot? I wanted to
Pivot.
There was a question that I was dying to ask you, which is, in the book, you alluded to, you had grown this, it sounded like a military contracting or some kind of company that seemed to be in defense. I'm butchering it, but at some point you realize we have too much money coming in from just the Defense Department and we need to diversify.
Right.
And you look around at all these different fields and say, what's next? And somehow you landed on healthcare. And you said, you know what, I'm just going to go in this direction. And I didn't quite understand how that pivot happened, or if it was really, if I understood it correctly. Could you just describe that a little bit, how that came to be?
Sure. So the stuff I write about in the books, when I did it the first or second time, I didn't think like, hey, this is my philosophy and this is how I wasn't self-aware. It's just that over time I would look back and say, well, how did I handle this? Well, I handled this by being open-minded, or I handled it by seeking insight and answers from everywhere other than my people, or everywhere and anywhere and everywhere but than my own personal experience and knowledge, because I'm carrying that baggage around, and it's only baggage because it's holding back my ability to learn and absorb new information, right? So I was a portfolio manager for United Bank of Switzerland. So I knew how to look at companies, I knew how to analyze markets, and I knew how to look at trends, both industry trends, macro trends, economic trends, et cetera. So we had this company, and it was the kind of the end of the major part of the global war on terror. And most of our funds were coming from anti-terrorism, counterterrorism training contracts. And so I thought, all right, what's going to happen if this trend continues? We are going to have less and less money being put into a global war on terror. And I thought maybe 24 months out would be the horizon, so I better act sooner rather than later. I went to my board, and they thought my intention was to go out and find another government contracting company and acquire it. That was in a lane that was different than counterterrorism and, maybe technical training for machines or something in the training category, but different than the other one. And I started that way. I handed the keys to my chief operating officer, and I said, I'm going to spend the next 4 or 5 months, and I'm just going to study the market, government contracting market. And I did. And I found that almost everybody in every category, every sector was in the same boat, because, when there's a war, money gets flushed in and everybody does well. If you're a company that makes truck tires, you're doing well. It doesn't, because it's just, there's a lot of money coming in. So I thought, I got the same potential negative outcome if I stick with government funded companies. So then I told the chairman of our board, I said, I'm going to go in a different direction. So 2 things I found out by looking at the government sectors. There's only 2 areas that looked like they might have some value. One was cybersecurity. The other one was healthcare. And I did a lot of, I was a Harry Dent fan. So I did a lot of demographic research and a lot of pharmaceutical investing when I was at UBS. So, I like the trend of the baby boomers and how that affects everything. So I thought, all right. So I talked to probably 6 or 7 different cybersecurity companies, CEOs, and they're all telling me, get away from it. You know, if you build something, you create something that's brand new, the shelf life's 12 months. So you have to kind of come up with another great, you know, top 40s hit like every 12 months. The other side of it is the staffing part of it, trying to find technology experts and everything, but they were starting to become commoditized at the point I started looking around. There were a lot of them being fleshed out. He said 10 years later, you know, it was gold. Now the schools are pumping these guys out like crazy. And some people are coming out of the military because the military's trained people. So I started focusing on healthcare. And then I eventually said, okay, it's going to be healthcare. And I don't think it's going to be government contracting. So I was completely agnostic. I took a diagram of the entire healthcare industry, every sector within it, instruments, you name it, everything. And I started analyzing every single sector, starting with the one that was the least likely to make sense to me, and ended with staffing. Because I understood staffing. If I'd started with staffing, I'd never want to look at the others. So I basically eliminated all the other possibilities in the healthcare industry by actually understanding what I was eliminating. And then I ended up in healthcare and long-term care. And then I bought a company that had one employee working in Richmond and started expanding it from there. So it really was kind of the open-mindedness and not having a preordained conclusion or even an assumption that there's one place to be or one thing to do. You know, now you got to play where you have some competence. And so staffing and managing staffing, the supply chain aspects of it wasn't that different from what we were doing in government contracting. So, you know,
And then you
that's what we
just
did.
grew it from there.
Yeah.
That's remarkable. That's what it sounded like. You really just said, well, we're going to go in a different direction. It seems like a lot of cojones to say, hey, let's just, we got this successful business. Let's do something completely different.
Well,
Right.
I didn't have a problem with it. My board was like, okay, you're a Navy SEAL running an anti-terrorism, counterterrorism company.
Right. Which
and now you want to work in the geriatric care business. And I go, look guys, one was killing bad guys and saving lives, and this one's saving lives. I mean, it's one's safety and security, the other one's, you know, I mean, I came up with all kinds of corollaries and I got them to agree finally. But it really was that. It was an altruistic goal on the government side. We were training people that are going into harm's way and people that were, you know, helping humanitarian stuff and that they needed to learn how to protect themselves. We were teaching medical people how to protect themselves in really dangerous parts of the world that they were being sent into. And so we always felt like there was an altruistic, you know, value to what we were doing besides just being in business. And that felt the same way on the healthcare side. So it to me, it seemed very natural. It still does. But
something that you mentioned about healthcare was that it doesn't require so much vision in healthcare right now because the processes are so antiquated that you can just sort of scavenge, or not scavenge, but just transition like what the technologies are in other businesses and bring them into healthcare. And there's tremendous opportunity there by doing that. So I guess as doctors in the healthcare system, like what kinds of things are you seeing that the healthcare system or we could be maybe doing better?
Well, I don't know if I made the point in the book, but the asymmetrical penetration of the healthcare industry, asymmetrical meaning by people, by industries, by groups, by companies, by investors that have no past history in healthcare, has been going on now for about 10 years and stronger as we got, you know, as we've moved on. I'll give you one example. I met a guy and I said, he had a lab company and I said, let's meet, let's talk about your lab services and everything. So then he sits down and he goes, well, I'm fascinated. What are you doing with healthcare and everything? You're a Navy SEAL and all that. And so I kind of told him a little bit of what I told you guys. And I said, so you were, you know, a lab technician? I go, oh no, I was a construction general manager. I did apartment buildings. And I said, okay, how'd that work? He goes, well, I had a family member and she was down in Tennessee or something. And she wasn't getting her meds and she wasn't getting her lab results and all that. And I thought, so I looked into it, and it was such a screwed up system, and it had to do with how much time it took and all that. So what I did as a general contractor is I managed subcontractors. So I made my money, and I made my bones by being able to, like an orchestra conductor, get the whole symphony to play perfectly according to a schedule, right? Because any disruption
Mhm.
threw everything off.
Right.
And so basically it's a microcosm of supply chain activity that has to be all choreographed in a way that you get the thing done to standard, to specs and everything at a certain time and to cost. Okay, most people are held to that standard. I mean, there's a lot of standards there, right? And if you screw it up once, you never get a job doing it again. So what he ended up doing is he Uberized lab services. He just created an Uber system of drivers that were incented by how fast and how many turnarounds they did in picking up lab.
Sure.
Yeah. And they just went in there and says, it takes you this long, watch this. And then once he started getting the user market, then he went to the labs. And then look at all my clients. And they went, oh, okay, do it for us then. And so you start going into all these other states. And I go, but that's all you know? You don't know anything about lab work? He goes, no, I just know how to get subcontractors to move around and incent them.
That's great.
So
Yeah.
he took something and you made the point that healthcare, everybody uses the word disruptive, or healthcare can be disrupted easily because healthcare is this ancient reflection of the U.S. government, because most of the money comes from the U.S. government. The system for paying doctors, the method for patients to select their care, it's all kind of like DMV in a lot of ways. And there's not a big macro attempt to try to take it over. There's not like a Microsoft that says, I want to be healthcare, although Amazon started going down that road a couple of years ago.
Yes.
But at the kind of the micro level, like this the example with the lab guy or what we're doing, usually the bar of performance and execution is so low, it's laying on the ground. You can come in there and just do a couple of things a little bit more efficiently and effectively, and you raise that bar 6 inches off the ground, and suddenly you're it. You're the bomb, right? Then you have to figure out a way to monetize it, and that's the hard part because the whole healthcare system's monetized in a different kind of way. So I'm giving a speech here in a couple of weeks to dentists who they're in a course to learn how to become cash only dentists for for dental surgery, kind of like what a lot of doctors have done to get away from the insurance based.
Sure.
And that's a disruptive feature. Of course, the supply demand is impacted because there's probably a lot more people that need general care than there are people that need specialty care. But they've seen the inefficiency of how they get paid, how they use their time, what they spend. They spend time on medicine, or do they spend time on paperwork and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So some of it's common sense, and it gravitates as long as somebody shows people a path to a better way of doing things. But it's happening in little places all over it's hard to find any. There's not like one big movement. It's I think it's because it's executable at the low level of activity, but the second you come up and knock on the door of a hospital system, boom, it doesn't work. The hospital system, it's like the Death Star. You don't know how to penetrate. You fly around, you're looking for that one spot.
It's a Byzantine kind of.
It is, and now they have all the staffing solutions, which was a smart move in healthcare. The hospital system said, let's change our strategy and let's outsource everything. And so they outsource everything. And now inside, my chief medical officer said, it's like the United Nations. He goes, imagine if everybody was wearing a jersey that said what company they work for, what staffing company they work for. I'm Dr. So-and-so. I work for Kowalski and Jones. And then there's a clock. I only have 2 months left of my 1-year contract, then I'm out of here. He said, because it's so hard to get an initiative through a hospital because it's the United Nations. They all have their own
Yeah.
objectives. Individuals
Right.
have their own reasons for being there. Talk about culture. I mean,
Yeah.
how do you get that culture in there? So I think, hospital administrators are basically just trying to keep war from breaking out. And, and then they've got their financial metrics and their optimization and their length of stay and,
Right.
readmission rates and all that kind of stuff to focus on. But yeah, it's not what people would think from the outside. It's not like a big football team with a quarterback or anything. It's very, very
So,
disparate and
in a funny
fractured.
way, this is one place where business, whereas you kind of, in a weird way, you're the visionary look at medicine, at least for the medium term, is optimization. It's like in this sense, optimization is not at odds with strategic thinking, because the strategic thinking is to optimize what has not been optimized.
Yes, but it's optimizing outcomes as opposed to optimizing the processes.
Yes.
So,
Mm.
right. So if I can make you more well by the process I'm applying, and on a scale of 1 to 10, my patients are walking out at a level 7 and other people's patients are walking out as an average level 4, then I can compare by outcomes, right? And so the lab example, what our company does, we have single digit readmission rates once we get into a place. It takes us about 3 months. So it's about care, and it's about the quality of the people that we put in place to do the care. And the bar was very low in geriatric medicine. So, you can make a big impact on the thing that matters, the end value to the end user, as opposed to just optimizing to make, to shave some dollars off or to shave some time off.
Right.
That's more the optimization I'm talking about, rather than go out and seize another market or come up with a better product or a new line. Let's go back and see if we can cut a few people. And, it's a financial, a lot of it's very financial optimization.
Right. And sometimes that short-term gain at the expense of long-term progress.
Almost always, especially if you're getting stock options.
Right. Are there things you see in medical practices that are similar to the dental world, or is it not something that you've really?
Yeah. I mean, my doctor he was in a practice group that had 11 doctors, and I think he was the second to last doctor standing. They all part of it was AMA, but over the course of about 4 or 5 years, they all either retired early or got into cash-based medicine.
Yeah.
And he was explaining to me, this was even before I had a healthcare company to be responsible for. He explained to me what their motivations were, and it was common sense motivation. Some of it was altruistic. It wasn't about the money. It was about, I did all this to become a doctor to help people, and I'm spending all this time managing a staff and going through paperwork, and I'm miserable. My ratio of patient care interaction engagement to other stuff that has nothing to do with that is gone from 60-40 to 40-60, in the span of and so, I mean, I don't know if that's everybody's, because there's a lot of different aspects and different niches in medicine, but general medicine that seems to be, they're frustrated, have been frustrated, and they're seeking a different path. It's kind of like you go to law school. I got talked out of law school. I took the LSAT when I was going to retire. I was going to go into law school, started shopping all my information around, and a friend of mine said, I have a friend that has this big law firm in Baltimore. You need to talk to him because he's going to talk you out of this. This is stupid. So I talked to him, and he tells me, yeah, you're a bright guy. I like you a lot. I'll hire you. Now, let me tell you what's going to happen for the first 3 years. I'm going to take an ex-Navy SEAL with a 4.0 average and all these great accolades and everything, and I'm going to make you a clerk.
Yeah.
You're basically going to be running around as a gopher and all that. And I go, what? Because that's not what I thought being a lawyer was going to be.
Right.
And he talked me out of it. I mean, because he said that's what it really is. It's, you don't start, telling a jury what you think about the case or anything. You start as
Law and Order. Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
a lot of people that go to law school drop out in law school, don't ever get their they get their degree, they don't pass the bar or even try to take the bar because they get to a point where they realize some way or another what that guy told me in one phone call. That's not what they
Yeah.
thought it was going to be. And so I think that's the same thing I hear from a lot of people in medicine, that they spend,
Yeah.
we talk to interns and residents about geriatric care, and they're like, nah, they're all aiming for the cash cow. They're all aiming for cosmetic surgery. And I mean, and they're coming right out of the box thinking this.
Right. Right. And part of the driver of that is the loans they take out for medical school. Right. And they
Sure.
look ahead and then,
Hey,
but yes, it's more,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm an entrepreneur. I understand exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it, and it makes perfect sense to me. Uh, and I
Yeah.
think it makes perfect sense for the people in my doctor's practice to have done what they did. And you kind of vote with your feet based on what you get out of life and what you want to do as a professional. So, no judgment on which path you take. It's just,
Yeah. 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 And people respond to incentives and all of that.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Can I take
Yeah.
another left turn? You got something else?
Go ahead. Go ahead. You may take the same turn as I was going to say.
You take the same
Okay.
turn? You go ahead.
No, 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 no.
I had another thing that I was really interested in asking you. It's something that I think about a lot, and you seem like kind of the perfect person to ask. Um, because you're a student of history, but you can also you're also look to the future and you synthesize from these sort of very disparate areas. And for me, as I look at the world today, it seems very chaotic. It seems very unstable. What's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in Europe and Russia, and all of this disruptive technologies that are happening. And so it's exciting, but it's also kind of scary. And I'm always wondering, is this an unusual time, or every once in a while I'll glance through, the 1973 headlines from January to December, and it's like, well, that looked pretty crazy, also, and I wonder if you feel like, and sorry, this is a radical left turn from what we were talking about before, but when you look at the world today, do you think this is just part of the natural ebb and flow of history and nothing to see here, sort of, except for the usual, turbulence and excitement and danger and everything? Or do you feel like we're coming to some kind of a precipice where radical change is on the horizon, or radical problems, or all of that? Like, how do you see where the world lies today?
I think history is created by humans. Humans act according to human nature. And there hasn't been a repeal of human nature, at least as far back as we can find writing, at least back to the ancient Sumerians. They tended to be greedy. They tended to be opportunistic. They tended to count the things they owned. They did all the same things we do today. They're human beings, right? So if you start from that premise, then as long as human beings are on the planet interacting with human beings, you're going to have the same kind of behaviors, and they'll either do it collectively or individually. And if you start going back and become a student of history, you'll find that, and I talk about this a lot in the third book, I don't believe that there's such a thing as stability. I think stability is an illusion. I don't think it's an achievable outcome. It's actually kind of a false promise, because the universe is in constant change. The universe, writ large, writ small, everything's in a constant state of adjustment, change, adaptation, de-evolution, evolution. So trying to hold on to one moment in time, it's kind of like the global warming, global cooling kind of thing. So everybody was concerned about the ice receding, but what you didn't see in most of the newspapers a couple of years ago was, as the ice receded in Greenland, they started finding evidence of human beings in villages, and people lived there 9,000 years ago.
Is that right?
Well, let's not talk about that. Well, so that means that there's been a cycle of weather, and
Mhm.
human beings were there doing what human beings do now. And when it got bad, most of them probably left, and their homes were covered in ice. If you look at the rise and fall of nations, there's a guy named Paul Kennedy who wrote a book, Rise and Fall of the rise and fall of the great nations. So he covered the rise and fall of Spain, France, Britain, and I think Holland. And what his thesis was look at the similarities spanning different times, different cultures. It was almost exactly the same thing. The term imperial overreach, is a cliche because they get to a point, well, we're doing so well, let's just try to grab the rest of the board, the risk board, and I'm going to grab that continent. And then they'd get crushed, and then everything would fall apart because they'd stretched out too thin. Next thing you know, Spain's paying everybody else not to invade them using the gold that they took from the New World. And I mean, so the economics is his point was the economics is driven by human behavior and human nature. The political behavior, which whether it's using economic power or military power to achieve an outcome, is repeatable. The use of economic power, the use of military power to achieve political gain or objectives goes all the way back to the beginning of written time. And whether it's the Assyrians or the Egyptians or the Babylonians, or you can go back, you find the same construct. You find the same expansion, contraction. You see the same negative impact on one population that are being, oppressed or destroyed and having all their worldly belongings stripped from them. And then you see the other population happy and becoming enriched by it. And then 150 years later, it goes the other way, right? It happened in Asia. It happened in Central and South America. It happened in Africa. So if you look at all that, you say, okay, so human nature is, and that history has been created by human nature. Then what we're seeing now in the streets, about what's going on in the Middle East, how different is that from the anti-war campus activity in the 60s, right?
Right.
I tell people that, I went to New York City and it was beautiful and it was safe and all that stuff. And they say, oh, it's terrible now. It's never been like this before. And I said, just go watch the movie The Warriors. It's an old old movie from the 80s. And the whole movie, they're just trying to get back to Coney Island, but they're going through New York City of the 70s. And you see that the subway is just spray painted, and all the windows are smashed out, and there's bad guys everywhere. It's happened before, right? So it's a cycle, and societies go through these cycles, and larger societies, nations go through these cycles. I think the part that does bear some, I guess, focus and thought is we've always had the destructive component to human nature. And if I run out of arrows, I can't kill anybody else, right? And so the scale of your destructive human nature has expanded quite a bit since the advent of nuclear weapons. And if you take AI and nuclear weapons and you have kind of a nexus of a couple of different technologies, then the only thing that would keep it from being more devastating than anything else in history, same motivation, same intentions, same human beings for same reasons, but the earth being scorched by that technology could be much, much more devastating. Whether we would learn a lesson from that, whether that would drive us back into another dark ages until we kind of came out of it in a new renaissance, I don't know. But I hope that there's as many people trying to contain and harness some of this as there are people trying to unleash it.
Yeah.
We'd be better off if we went back to bows and arrows, because then we couldn't really hurt each other too bad.
Right. Does introduction of AI as a potential sentient being, does that introduce a potential pivot in the nature of the way historically we were as a species, we interacted this way? Does that have to penetrate so much decision making that we're nowhere near that?
Again, I hate to do this to you, but there's a movie called The Colossus, the Forbin Project from the early 60s, where the U.S. creates a computer that can control and direct more efficiently all the nuclear weapons of the United States. And then the computer starts to talk to something that they can't figure out, and it's the Russian version of it. and then they decide that the best way to maintain peace, which is their prime objective, is to demonstrate what will happen if anybody tries to start a war. And so they each pick one city and nuke it on either side. All right. So this is not a new thing. This was a fear back then with basic computing. that if you turn a computer over, if you turn the key decisions, critical decisions over to a computer, that the computer could decide something different than you intended. So machine learning, that sounds really friendly, right? It's like a robot helping put a car together. But really AI is machine learning. And if the machine can learn more than you taught it, if it becomes, like you said, sentient and starts to do, like I was talking about before, becomes humble and then curious and then starts sucking in information. I mean, ChatGPT right now it's just like an amped up Wikipedia, but that's like that's AI 1.0.
Yeah.
Corporations and defense industries, that they're probably at like a 10th generation AI, which is a whole different kind of animal. So, and try it. I don't know if you just have ChatGPT look you up. It was fine for a little bit. I had to do it, and it got to a point where it ran out of stuff, and it starts feeding off its own input. So eventually it's Marty Strong, then Marty Strong SEAL. And then it said I was the first SEAL to capture an Iraqi soldier in Desert Storm. It said I had 3 Bronze Stars. It started adding every other attribute of every SEAL it was finding. So eventually, if I kept on going, I probably would have been the guy that shot bin Laden, because it was taking everything about Navy SEALs and eventually attaching it to my inquiry.
And then you couldn't argue with those facts because AI decided it.
Well, right.
It becomes the reality.
Right. I mean, and that's a very benign search, but I think you need to I have one chapter in the new book about AI, because it can either be a tool or it can be an autonomous functioning thing. If it's a tool, you ask it to do things, you ask it to figure things out. And it can do it at a greater speed. It can do it in a way that its inquiry is universal, or a particular database, depending on if you've scrubbed and cleaned the database up, which is what these advanced forms of AI, they're actually using contained databases, because it's garbage in, garbage out kind of thing. But the thing, people aren't afraid of the tool part. And the people that are proponents are hyping up the tool use of it. And the people that are afraid of the standalone, kind of like the Forbin project, that it's going to sit over here and figure something out on its own, that we're not going to know about it until it's too late. So I think there's legitimate concern, especially just think of that movie. I mean, what if that was really true? What if the entire nuclear systems of 5 or 6 nuclear nations were all tied into AI, and the AI decided to have a cocktail party one night and let's just have some fun, and we'd all find out about it the next morning,
Right.
I think there's legitimate reasons to have concern. And even Elon Musk is now trying to create a company that's, because he was an original on the
Open chat, ChatGPT.
ChatGPT, but he actually kind of walked away from that for some of these same concerns. He says maybe you need AI to fight AI. You need good AI that can counter bad AI. And if you use AI to
what could go wrong with that idea?
I don't know. I mean, mutually assured AI, right?
Right.
Yeah, it goes out of the realm of practical and goes into the realm of philosophy, or really, really bad theology, if you really want to get concerned about it. But yeah, I think medicine. I think if you had AI run through 500 different ways to do a procedure and give you the probabilities and outcomes of the procedures that you're contemplating, or maybe come up with 2 or 3 alternatives, or create a hybrid of a couple of things you wouldn't have thought of in the moment, you might be at a point in doing surgery where you only have 4 minutes to figure out what you're going to do. And maybe that could enhance a surgeon's ability to make the right decision, or at least a much, much more probable positive outcome decision. Right. And nobody's thinking about that. Usually when you see AI, when I wrote the chapter, I said, I'm going to start Googling AI and look at what's out there. 95% of it was end of the world stuff. It was all fear. It was all fear mongering. And it was hard for me to find articles about practical positive application of AI. No, but it's there.
Yeah, certainly. And then there are definitely a lot of studies and a lot of tried applications to augment decision making. But really, the key operative word is augmenting our own decision making, because it becomes the ultimate objective assessor of the current situation, where no matter what, as a physician, you're trying to be as objective as possible, but subjectivity is part of our human nature, and so it's impossible. So having that augment our decision making is certainly a great tool. And the fear of AI, I think Yuval Harari has given an example, which I think is where my mind goes to in terms of the fear of the AI. And the example that he had was its similarity of, you can teach a monkey to use a hammer by copying something, but imagine trying to explain to a monkey what a space station is. There's just no point of reference. And um, exponential AI gets to the same point where we as humans just cannot comprehend. We have no point of reference of their computational power, and then we lose all control over it, and then it's game over. That's kind of the fear end of that spectrum.
Yeah. I guess the only good thing is that human beings aren't that good at making things that good. I mean,
For sure.
I mean, we tried to fix a lot simpler things and not really got it to what the promise of.
Fair.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's interesting.
The fear definitely is that AI is going to be good at what we cannot do, and that's the fear. That's hypothetical.
That's like the
But-
long term.
But what if it's not? Right? It's-
yeah. Well, the other part of this is something that I think it's important to think about. So when we first started getting technology in the SEAL teams, it wasn't very good technology. It was, like a 25-pound cell phone, a 30 or 40-pound satellite radio that had only 2 satellites, and so you had to wait to a very specific time, and then you had to take this dish, and you had to do a thing called bounce back. You basically had to keep hitting this thing that sent a signal out, "Are you out there? Are you out there?" And if you got a bounce back, then it was terrible. It was terrible, and we didn't have navigation for sure, so we were all taught the way people have been taught, and how parents taught people probably 5,000-6,000 years ago. We were taught terrain navigation. We were taught how to look at the weather, look at the plants, look at rivers. So if we lost our compass, we still knew how to navigate across the ground. And they tried to do this with navigation over water. They started giving us these satellite navigation systems, and they were failing and everything. And we actually were told to go out one time and try it without compasses. Trust the system. They thought we were the problem. And we ended up running out of gas and floating, and got picked up by the Coast Guard off the coast of North Carolina the next morning. So our system said we were somewhere off the coast of North Africa in the Mediterranean part.
Oh gosh.
And we're like, we had no idea where we were. They dropped us out of an airplane to start the exercise, and so it was a total failure. And I was overruled on bringing at least a compass and a nav board to be able to do it the old-fashioned way. So the same thing is happening now. The military is realizing that if the satellites get knocked out in the beginning of a war, they have generations of Marines and soldiers that are relying on, they rely on this thing to get around. They don't look at maps, and it's a tool, but then the tool becomes, a replacement for you having any understanding of what you're involved in, the context of what you're involved in. So they're trying to reteach that, because you need to know the basics. You need to know because that's a real possibility. If the satellites go out, your nav systems aren't going to work, and you're going to have to go back to old school and, count how many streams you crossed and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's the same way with medicine. That's the same thing. I think about almost everything. The more you enhance performance with technology, the more you're compelled to kind of just rely on the technology. And then in the early training, like you guys, it's be like med school, you start to not do the basics because you don't have to. And next thing you know, you've got generations of doctors or generations of engineers or pilots or whatever. I was an instrument rated pilot, and they still teach you, and you have to take a test every year, and they still make you fly the plane and land the plane, do everything off of the analog systems. You have to use an actual compass. You have to use the pitot tube showing you what your airspeed is. You have to, you can't use the actual systems. They disconnect the glass cockpit, and you got to fly it like Lindbergh did,
Yeah.
because that could happen. So
Yes.
But that's a great example of something where they probably don't keep up with that as much as they might, because you see a lot of times when there's a crash, right? When they play it back, there's some kind of systems malfunction with the electronics,
mhm.
and the pilots aren't used to it, and they don't they don't seem to intuitively or know how to compensate for that. They just keep fiddling with the same
Yep.
sensors. The sensors might be broken.
Years ago, there was a French aircraft that airline that flew from, I think, South America towards France and went down somewhere in the Atlantic. Took them a couple of years, but they finally found the black box. And they couldn't, when they looked at the black box recording and everything, these guys, their instruments were telling them they were almost completely level and at a certain altitude, but they were basically flying themselves down towards the ocean. And they just drove themselves, they flew right into the ocean. And the takeaway from that, from an FAA standpoint, aviation lessons learned, was they weren't looking at all the instruments. They were only looking at the technology. They weren't looking at things like a simple compass or the pitot tube or the ball to see what the attitude of the aircraft was. And if they had, they'd realize that they were nose down for an hour and a half to 2 hours. They kept trying to correct based on the instruments, but the instruments were all screwed up. So everything they did made it worse.
Yeah.
So the rule in flying is whatever happens, fly the plane. If and you can't chase the instrument readings and the feedback, but that's what people do because they're taught technology.
Right.
Nobody that's having some trouble with this kind of thing just puts it down and tries a different kind of simpler
Right.
approach. They spend another hour trying to fiddle with that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of difficult, because if we go into it with the rules and then we follow the rules, getting unlocked from that one step after another. So in sailing, the rules of the road, if you will, right? You have this boat is a stand-on vessel, the other one has a right of way, and then multiple rules. But then the final rule is you can break all the rules as long as you avoid the collision. Like, it's so important to follow the rules, but then the most important rule is just break the rules if you can avoid that collision.
Yeah,
And
I'm a Navy man. We had
Yeah.
the law of gross tonnage. That was the final rule.
right. And one of the things that actually, there's one quote of yours that we have in the notes that we both kind of touched on. This goes with this,
Oh,
right?
that's my
That,
favorite quote.
yeah, wisdom is precious because it is costly, right? And that is the wisdom. Is it's costly because it's built on those mistakes.
Yeah. Sum
That's a
total of all your
great-
mistakes.
We both wrote it down, and from just totally independently of each other. And I was like, that should be on every mug. It's such a it's
Well, the problem is once you get wisdom, you're usually hanging out with other people that have wisdom too. It's not the young people that haven't got there yet. And hey, I was an arrogant young person. I think I was a little bit better at listening to the older guys because I wanted to be good. I wanted to be as good as them. So I listened, to every old Vietnam SEAL and what they did and how they did it. And I listened to the stories and absorbed it and all that. I never had anything but respect for them. But there's a point like when you're 25 years old, 28 years old, and being a SEAL is kind of like being an NFL football player. You start off and, your parents deliver this brand spanking new 18-year-old kid, no bones broken, probably equivalent to a college level athlete, big smile on their face. They can sleep well. And then at the end of 20 years, the Navy drops off this bag of stuff, and you're I mean, I've got 80% disability. I've got multiple broken bones, about 200 stitches everywhere. I mean, frostbite and multiple digits, on and on and on and on. But it was a cascading as time went on, right? And you get to a point where you're like 27, 28, and maybe you run past an older guy who's 34 or 35, or you see him kind of have a hard time getting up out of a chair or something, and you give him a hard time. Hey, what the hell? And they look at you and they go, "You'll see." And see, that's wisdom speaking. But I'm like, nah, not me. Not me. I'll never be the guy who can't get out of a chair. Yeah. So yeah, it's very hard to get, and then once you get it, it's probably too late. It's hard to impart it to other people without them living through it.
That is the rub, right? It's like telling
Yeah.
kids. I tell my kids all the time, I did mistakes, so you don't have to listen to, but a lot of things you have to
But
feel.
that's why they say youth is wasted on the young.
Yes,
It's
yeah,
it's a lot of energy, a
Yeah.
lot of ability without the wisdom.
yeah. Although there's a country song where the line is, "Youth isn't wasted on the young because being young would be a lot less fun if you had the wisdom."
But there's a lot of little life lessons that I think we've stopped teaching kids through experience that people my generation for sure had it. If I ran out of gas on a highway in Nebraska, one, I couldn't call my parents because I didn't have a cell phone. And the only way I was going to get gas, if there was more than me, if there's three of us, we'd push the car
Mhm.
until we found some place that had gas. And then we'd go and we'd beg whoever was there if we could just, borrow the gas and swear we'd come back and pay him the money or something, or we'd have enough money to put together. And then we have just enough gas to get home or get to a gas station. And what do you learn from that? You learned how to coast down hills. You had coping behaviors. You learned that leaving the house with being close to E, for that generation is like I
Yeah.
remember I don't want to push my FJ Cruiser anywhere because you learned because you didn't have an immediate safety net, you didn't have an immediate emergency response team or parents, whatever. So there were still some lessons you learned. You got wise about a lot of things, environmentally more than anything else. So I think there's a harder lesson. It's a harder road for people of the last, say, 20 years, because when life gets easy and living gets easier, you're not failing as much. The wisdom isn't piling up. You're not running into the obstacles face first and stepping back and going, whoa, and gaining something from it.
Yeah.
They may just take longer. I don't know.
Well, it probably has a lot to do with the problems, why the quality of resilience is so talked about, because it's, so lacking, right? Because people don't have to develop it, because, we tend to be more coddled, and so we have to go, in some ways you have to go looking for your own hardships to, your own dragons to slay, as Jordan Peterson might say. Um, in order to have those adventures, to fall on your face, to get back up, but you can't just, it's a lot easier to coast, um,
So
which is not good.
risk-taking behavior of almost any kind. Think about business risk-taking, sports, relationships. I mean, if you don't believe in taking risks, you don't take risks, and so then you don't learn lessons. And
Yeah.
then the first lesson you have to learn is even harder because you didn't have any warm up. Yeah. So I one thing you said, resilience. Navy SEAL selection is a selection. It's not a training to turn you into a SEAL. The real training to turn you into a SEAL happens kind of after that initial. I think it's now 5 months. It used to be 6 months. And what they're looking for really is they're screening for psychological resilience and emotional maturity in an 18-year-old. So that means that's one of the reasons why 75% of every class since 1962 has been the attrition rate. My class started with 126 and we graduated with 13 originals. And that's why somebody like me, I was 18, I looked like I was 11 and I weighed 125 pounds, but somehow I ended up being there on graduation day because what they were doing is they were putting you through a series of experiences and seeing how you dealt with it psychologically.
Yeah.
And those that had some kind of resilience from something in their past, bad home life, sometimes it was a very good home life, but maybe a tough love home life, whoever, those people got through that crucible and ended up on the other side. And then we start training them. So it's not a build-up process. It's not a let me teach you how to be a SEAL kind of process. We're looking for people that when they're faced with hardship, take a deep breath and take another step.
Do you think that resilience can be taught, or do you think that that's something people either have or they don't?
I think it can be taught. I think, for example, in business, the military runs scenario-based training all the time. So They do it they chop up a full mission into small pieces, and they do situational type training exercises where you're just doing the first phase, and you do it 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, iterations, but in 1 or 2 days. So you have a lot of chances to make a mistake and then learn from the mistakes and get better. Then they have full exercises where you got to go through the entire series of phases. But you can take almost anything in business and turn it into a scenario-based training, especially things like decision making. I mean, you can go into a room and say, all right, guys, this is what we're going to do. We're going to build a marketing plan because we need a new marketing plan because this just happened. And you hand them the inject information and say, here's what's just changed about our company or about our competitors, our industry, whatever. A regulation that just changed that if we don't do something quick, we're sunk. And then you walk out of the room and they have to build a new marketing plan based on a whole new paradigm. And you can use the team that would normally do it, and they realize they're not prepared for it. Psychologically, they haven't thought this out of the box. They haven't thought this catastrophic. But guess what? You don't have weeks and weeks and weeks to talk about it and feel about it. You got to get something done because we have to do something now. And if you do that a couple of times, just like running EMTs or firemen or SWAT teams, you can run them through iterations of this type of kind of rapid decision making, rapid plan prototyping development to where they get comfortable with it. And then when the real thing happens, they're psychologically and emotionally prepared. It's not the first time. They have a game plan. They have a rhythm. They know, let's get everybody in a room. Let's get some whiteboards in here, order pizza. All right.
Right.
What do we know? You can do that with any human being. It doesn't have to be a Navy SEAL.
Do you think that on some level also by doing that, you're not just building resilience in that lane, but that carries over to other lanes in their life as well? You know what I mean? So like there's this, you're iterating a problem and you're getting better at being cool under the scenario for that problem. But when you're faced with a totally different kind of problem, does that resilience carry over?
I think that training would help you be a better problem solver in other aspects of your life. I guarantee you that if you actually went through a real event, that would help you. Because the more it's kind of like the wisdom thing, the more you're thrown into crisis, the more you're a real crisis, the more you deal with, death, destruction, catastrophe, business-wise or otherwise, you get kind of I'll call it kind of a sense of poise in the moment that I think it transcends everything. I mean, I'm not a firefighter, but I've been in situations where we pulled people out of fires, just happened to come across a car on fire or something. I didn't panic and freak out like I was brand new to a problem like that. I felt, and as a father, I have 5 kids and 5 grandkids, same kind of thing. It really helped me as a father. If a kid breaks his arm or cuts his finger, I don't go, oh my God, especially since SEALs are all taught in advanced trauma care and all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah.
And that's also, that's also taught that scenario based way too. You're not chopping guys up and then say, let's do the real thing. You're basically practicing constantly. How do you do a trach with a ballpoint pen? All this kind of stuff. Not that you're ever going to do it, but the moment that something happens, you're just kind of relaxed about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think that can be a learned skill for people, at least to a point?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I really do.
I do too.
Is that, do you feel like that to some extent is a perishable skill? That someone who just kind of settles into a more comfortable zone for a number of years won't have that to tap into as much? There are certain things that are going to stay with you, but is that something that you kind of need to expose yourself routinely to maintain a certain level?
I think to keep your brain sharp to react at the optimum level of competency, yes. The thing I see that affects it more is the consequence. So, young people have less to lose. They take more chances. They take more risks. Then they have something to lose. They take less risks. And pretty soon they have a lot to lose and they take no risks. And by that time, they're 40 or 50 years old. It's hard to get a 40 or 50-year-old ex-military guy to lay his life on the line the way he did when he was 22.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing with entrepreneurs. It's if you're 22 or 23 and you just throw your hat in the ring and you try to start a restaurant and all that kind of stuff, and you fail twice, you go bankrupt, you start another one, your third one takes. And I'm actually kind of paraphrasing one of my friends' real story. And then all of a sudden you're a millionaire, and if somebody walked up to you and says, "Hey, you want to start a brand new restaurant again?" It's like, I'm a millionaire. I got a
Right.
nice house, I got a nice family, because you have
Yeah.
something to lose. And the more that happens, I mean, we had a couple times when conflict, one was unfortunately wasn't even real, but they set us up that we were going to go off to war someplace all the time. They recall you in and they practice kind of like a fireman drill, and all your stuff is staged and it's easy to get on an airplane and all that. So there was a time when they decided to do that to test the command, and a guy thought it was real, and he walked in and he turned in his sealed trident, the gold eagle. Walked into the XO's office and said, I'm done."
Wow.
And he was a senior guy, and he had 3 kids, and he had just gotten to a point in his life. He goes, "I'm not going to jump on a plane, parachute in someplace, and start, putting my life on." I mean,
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
and the thing was, what do you do? Because the XO knew that it was a drill,
Mhm.
Right.
Right.
but you can't
Yeah.
take that back. You can't take that
Right.
that moment back.
Right.
Sure.
And and that's okay. That was how he really felt about it, and that's fine. But he was at one end of the spectrum of his experience as a SEAL, and he had more and more and more to lose. So he got to a
Yeah.
point where he says, "I'm no longer a Jedi Knight."
Right. Yeah. Although there is some irony because when you're younger, you have more life in front of you. So in some ways, when you're a 70-year-old SEAL, you in some ways have more to lose. In some ways,
Well, you don't know. You also
You're-
don't when you're young. You don't know the ramifications of your actions. So
yeah, I think a lot of it's testosterone.
there's a point. I mean, there's a reason why Napoleon, Alexander the Great, Tesla, Edison, and Einstein were all under the age of 30, 31 when they did all the
Yeah.
world-shattering things that they did, because they didn't know any better, or they didn't care because they didn't know what the downside was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Great point.
Yep. I have one more
Pivot?
pivot if it's okay.
Pivoted.
Last pivot, I think, because I know
You guys are like, it's like being interviewed by a couple of NBA guards. You guys are always pivoting, always pivoting.
If you were giving advice to a young guy starting out, young lady starting out, that wanted to make their mark in the business world, and you said, just looking at the opportunities out there, where would you suggest that they start? Like I've heard Elon Musk say, I think he says AI and neuroscience. I think is his other thought on that. Although I could be mistaken on that. Are there fields or avenues that you think are particularly ripe for young entrepreneurs, young budding business people?
I think he's right about AI. I think programming programming kind of ebbs and flows because they get to a point of standardization, like the sockets in your house. The sockets in your house are the same as the sockets at everybody else's house because they standardized it, right? Well, software is like that, programming's like that. It starts out as the Wild West, and then everybody's doing everything. So there's a need for lots and lots of ideas, and eventually it kind of galvanizes into standards, and then it
Mhm.
solidifies into the normal, and then something comes along and blows it apart, and it starts all over again. Like the communications link aspect, say, of phones versus computers, and computers went to a certain point, but they weren't going to be talking to anybody else. They were just going to be talking to you, and all of a sudden they're talking to everybody else, and so there's a whole new opening for a different kind of um, software and programming and design, creative design. And I think AI opens that door again. I think the whole Internet of Things opens up that door again, trying to get everything in your house to talk to each other, everything get your house to talk to the outside world, and so that the house tells the fire department that there's a fire as soon as it has any detection of any kind of anomaly. There's all kinds of things that have to do with environmental controls. The anomalous software stuff, which isn't normal, it's kind of used more in the military. And so what I mean is I take a very high pixel video of all the bushes and trees along a fence line. Okay. And every single day, every single night, the computer matches what's out there in reality to what it has in its database. And then there's another shape there that doesn't belong.
So,
So it's anomalous detection. So it basically said there's an anomaly. It alerts somebody. Somebody goes and looks and they turn on the infrared or thermal, and there's a guy's silhouette standing out there. That's been around for 30 years. Okay. So you can, I have a friend that does, has 38 patents. He does unmanned aerial stuff, and he's got a device that flies up on cell towers and high speed, real high quality pixel cameras that collect, and they also collect and absorb the signals being emitted by everything up there, because there's clusters up there of microwaves and everything else. And then that was the first part, just the collection part. But then he realized that it'd be more effective if he created software that matched it against the actual specs. Everything from the attitude of the tower, whether it was tilting, which would throw the whole cluster alignment off, or if a bird strike, it altered the emission of some emitter or a repeater that was up there. And so then he said, "Oh, give me all the specs." You put it into a software program. And so this is normal. Go up and collect. What's the anomaly? See?
yeah.
So anomalous detection software can be created to do that for almost anything. It's going to be probably what truly what would you call it? Autonomous cars, eventually autonomous aircraft. That they're going to have the context, and it's going to be an anomalous software that tells them where they are in time and space, in the context of buildings and roads and all that stuff. And it's going to be an infrastructure build more than anything else. So if you're out there and you want to get into something like this, every pathway, whether it's a road or an imaginary below 1,000 foot aerial path for unmanned aerial vehicles, all of it's going to need somebody to come in there and design the atmosphere around it, to create the context, to create the context, and to create the normal. So then the anomaly can be detected against the normal. And if that's happening, and you're going around like this in a visible tube of space, and that system's telling you're too far left, you're too far right, and it's telling the system to correct, now you're here.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that in software. There's a lot of that in transportation. The whole transportation industry is getting galvanized by this autonomous piece. There's a company called Locomotion that's got autonomous semi carriers. So maybe what they need is to create their own context. Maybe they need to have a new superhighway system that's not for anything other than autonomous, almost like railways, right?
Yeah.
You don't take your car and drive down the railroad track. So there could be something where you create a super 6-lane highway system that causes these autonomous semi trucks to go screaming across the country at hyper speed and not endanger anybody else. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's happening. Transport, the use of software to facilitate all these kinds of physical changes.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
So
exciting.
I would pay attention to all of that. I think that's kind of, that's going to be the Wild West now for the next probably 15 to 20 years.
Yeah.
You can make an autonomous car, but then you can't go anywhere safely because the environment isn't tuned for it.
Oh, I have a Tesla, and I feel like if I let it go, I'll be dead in like 20 seconds. It's gonna drive.
Well,
it just
maybe,
it's
but if you get hit broadside by a 1968, Volkswagen Beetle, it's because the Beetle doesn't know anything about you. The Tesla is going to say, "Uh-oh, Beetle, right side." The Beetle doesn't care. So you have to have you have to create environments. You have to create contextual environments.
Right.
That's a whole area of technology I think it's incredible. It's
Yeah. The idea
there's
of
some
anomalous, I mean, that in medicine, that's radiology in a nutshell. That's why, the first application of AI in our field is probably radiology because
yeah
it's one of the easier things because there's a norm and you're looking for an abnormal
anomaly
within that
in there.
norm. And but I hadn't thought of it in other contexts like travel.
Well, I mean,
It
travel,
dawned on me.
that kind of goes back to what changed America. One of the things is the railroads, right? And if that changed the country so much, now if you create these superhighways, that would be
That'd be
a
very
huge leap.
nice.
yeah, and not just superhighways, terrestrial superhighways in the sky too.
Yeah.
You could use the same lanes, or you could. So there's a lot of it's a whole new frontier,
Yeah.
and it's going to be really interesting because there's going to be Einsteins and Teslas and not Einstein, Edison's. There's going to be people that mechanically figure
Yeah.
out what needs to be done,
Yeah.
and they're going to create whole new industries, and they're going to change the way things are. And everybody coming out of the urban environment, they're going to be that's going to be facilitated, but that's going to be facilitated even greater because communications is connected to everybody. We don't have to be physically next to each other.
Right.
I saw one futurist said, every parking lot in every major urban center is going to become essentially a little mini aviation depot. Everybody's going to
Mhm.
fly in there, and then you'll have cars down on the second level, and you can drive around where you want in the city, then come back up and fly back out
Mm,
to your suburban or rural farm,
right.
every night. Yeah,
That sounds nice.
yeah. Unless that Volkswagen's out there,
Yeah. Watch out for the beetle.
Watch
Yeah.
out for the Beatles.
the one bird that didn't get the memo.
um, I had one more pivot. If no, go ahead.
Do it.
You sure?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I, one more guard pass? One more quick pivot, if it's okay.
Sure.
You mentioned before that it was just in passing, and it struck me that we were talking about ChatGPT, and you said the government is probably like 10 iterations
Oh, they are.
behind it. Is that right?
They
So
are.
even
Oh,
in like
absolutely.
AI, they're leading the charge, even if it's like DARPA, and we won't hear about it for.
Yeah, but you can subscribe. There's commercial AI you can subscribe to that's probably 3 or 4 generations advanced. ChatGPT it's not even the BlackBerry of cell
I missed
phones.
the
It's
BlackBerry.
Is it that
now
8-pound phone that you mentioned?
Yes.
well, it is. It is essentially ChatGPT is the 25-pound cell phone right now. It's cool to everybody, and they're all trying to do stuff. But there are engineers in my robotics on my board that they've got access to other stuff. There's apps you can go out and look for, and that seems to be the distinction is the quality of the pool of information it's drawing from. Now,
Okay.
so for example, if everybody's idea about how to do surgery on the planet, regardless if they're a farmer or a bridge worker or painter or whatever, if all of their ideas were all in the database and then AI pulled from everything, it would be universal input, but it would also be polluted with a lot of things that might kill somebody. So the thing is to find the niche and cleanse the input and the data in the niche, kind of validate it, make sure that it's sanctified to some level of quality standard, and keep doing that over time. So it keeps building, and then the AI itself will start to make collaborative connections and create a tertiary and exponentially start adding more to the data. But it's working with diamonds working with diamonds working with diamonds. It's not a bunch of garbage. So yeah, that's kind of where corporations are trying to go. Financial services firms are looking at.
So it's not so much the software or the code, but it's more being able to target it and pull from better sources.
Clean. So now you can see here how this can get messed up, right? So your clean and my clean might be different clean, right? So if it's a political difference or if it's a social difference as part of the input, then you're going to have a mess, right?
Yeah.
So but if it's purely technical, like if it's medicine or it's aviation or something like that,
Right.
there shouldn't be that, it shouldn't be that tough to put all that stuff in, because really what you're doing is like all those clean pieces of information are like Lego pieces. And then AI has this massive, this massive buildup of individual Lego pieces, and it starts putting them together in every possible imaginable way, which creates other shapes in there that didn't exist in the beginning. But they're all Lego pieces, so they're all quality, right? You don't have like a basketball in there. So it all it all works. So,
Right.
that's where I think where AI really starts to gain traction in being
Yeah.
something that's exponentially beneficial. And it may just be confusing if you applied it to things like polling of, people's opinions, or because then it could be
Right.
matched against an opinion instead of
Right.
all opinions.
Yeah, that's been one of the sort of frustrating and funny pieces about ChatGPT is how people can pull out political biases within it because, of course, people coded it, so it's gonna reflect those biases.
Yeah,
going
I haven't
into
been
it.
harmed
They
by
found
it
it.
because it said that I was a war hero, but um, so
We'll
I'm,
make
I'm a
sure to
big
put
fan.
the link
I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan. Except that after this interview, it's probably going to shut all my services down because
For the likely, yes.
Yeah.
I'll get the oh yeah email, and that'll be the end of that. Yeah, I mean, fascinating stuff, and I think young people are kind of at the beginning of the technology age, probably phase 2 or 3, kind of like the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. I think
Yeah.
that the changes now in the next 20, 30 years are going to be like the changes at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. I think what's left of the Industrial Revolution will start to be replaced by this new way of doing things. And everything from the way buildings are built, everything's going to change. And there's opportunity whenever there's change.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in your next book, the one, when is that coming out, by the way?
Comes out pre-sale, let's see, February 1st. And
Okay.
August 1st, it comes out for release. It's called Be Different: How Navy SEALs and Entrepreneurs Bend, Break, or Ignore the Rules to Get Results.
So you go into these concepts in the book, I would imagine.
Yeah, because it's all about innovation and creativity without implementation is just daydreaming, right? So you need to have
Mhm.
grounding. And so in all my books, I start this way. But in this case, you be visionary. I start off with, it's okay to be a dreamer. It's okay to think big thoughts, even though you've been told that that's not productive. So I try to get them warmed up to the rest of the book, right? And I kind of show them how to do it mechanically. In Be Different, I talk about the first 3 chapters are about I think I mentioned earlier, how much the creativity has been beaten out of us by the time we get to about 23, 24 years old. Mostly from school, because you're taught in school what has happened. Everything's a history lesson. I don't care. I mean, when you guys were going through medical school, they didn't teach you about what medicine was like in the year 2027 or something. They taught you the way medicine was at that point, right? And the history of medicine up to that point and all that. Same thing with engineering, architecture, art, business, everything.
Right.
You're always rear view mirror. And if you said, well, what if I did this? You said, what if we built a cell phone,
Yeah.
a phone the size, the computing power greater than the Apollo lander, but the size of a pack of cigarettes? You'd be shut up and just memorize what I told you to memorize. You don't know anything about computers, kid. Shut up. Those kinds of thoughts, those kinds of creative thoughts that you say all the time, you just blurt them out when you're a kid. You're kind of, all those things are battered out of you. I want to be
Mhm.
I think I want to be a lead singer in a rock band. Everybody tells you that's a stupid idea.
Yeah.
So you never bring it up again. You eventually realize that there's no upside to saying something that isn't
Yeah.
conformative. And then in school, it's even worse. You have to do what they say to get the grades to get to where you want to get to go. And you get into your first job and you're onboarding. What do they say? Well, okay, so this is where you have to park in the parking lot. Don't park over here. This is where you can go, but you can't go on these 3 floors. You have to wear a sport coat if you leave your cubicle. This is,
Yeah.
in other words, it's a whole new level of indoctrination and rules of what you can't do. And I guarantee in most companies, if you're the new person that walked in and they're talking about something and you have an insight and you go, well, what if you did this? All the heads would pivot to you and like,
Right.
shut up,
Right.
right. And so
Yeah.
someday when you're in charge, when you're 40, you're suddenly supposed to turn on that engine of
That's such a good
creativity and
point.
ingenuity.
Right.
It's gone. It's not that you can't do it biologically. Your brain is still the same brain unless you have some medical impairment,
Yeah.
which is another thing that the book talks about is you can be 60, 70, 80, as long as you don't have any biological impairment in the way your brain functions, you can relearn how to switch that explorer, that forwarder switch on and start thinking big and thinking outside the box. You can do that. It's unlearned and can be learned, relearned.
Mm. I like that. There's hope for us.
Well, I think for most people.
Ah,
I don't know if the pit.
movie.
I don't know if there's any hope for the Pivot Twins.
No, unlikely. Unlikely.
That's just the basketball career went down.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm definitely, I can't wait to read it.
Yeah. Same.
I
Same.
really, really enjoyed your first. I actually read Be Visionary twice. Because
Really?
I read that first, and then I read Be Nimble. And then I thought, with the context of Be Nimble, I wanted to go back and get Be Visionary.
Gotcha.
again. And it was really, I really enjoyed the whole, it was really a great read. And,
Well, thank you.
no, thank you. I'm the beneficiary of it, so thank you. I don't have another pivot. I don't think. I feel like
No. I feel like we've monopolized your time.
yeah. Oh my gosh! Wow, look at that. It's been 2 hours. Okay, Marty, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a delight, and I feel like we've learned a lot.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, I've had a good time.
Terrific. Well, we look forward to your next chapter. We definitely look forward to your next book, and hopefully we can talk again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Friends, thank you for your attention. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation. If you find value, please remember to hit the like button to help us with our YouTube algorithm. Consider subscribing to the channel and turn on the notifications so you can stay up to date with everything going on with the channel. And please leave us a comment, let us know what you thought about the show and also what you'd like to hear about in the future.